Hello, everyone. All right, so I'm here with my friend Martha, and we felt to share this talk on the upcoming Jupiter Uranus conjunction. I mean, we're still a good month and a half away from them joining, but they're active, they're engaged, they're in what we call the balsamic phase, completing a cycle. And there's a lot to say about them right now as they are. So, hello, Martha. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Ari.
So we'll be both posting this on both of our channels. And if you're watching this on mine, please check out Martha's channel. I'll post that in the description below. So before we jump in, quick reminder, I have my training program coming up. For those that are drawn to study astrology from a spiritual perspective, interested in understanding the soul and looking at this life as a template for our spiritual evolution, we begin this course in a couple weeks. It's an opportunity to train with me. Martha, you've done this program with me. A lot of people that are just really devoted to their own spiritual growth are drawn to this work. So check that out in the description below as well. So, Martha, to start this topic off, I was thinking maybe we can just take a moment and just connect deeply with the energetics of Jupiter and Uranus. Does that sound good to you?
Yes, it's
Okay.
great.
So, I was thinking this whole topic can be explored kind of from two angles. There's the point of view of Jupiter and the point of view of Uranus. So, what we'll do today is we'll give our attention to Jupiter. So, we'll think of this from the point of view of Jupiter approaching Uranus. Thus, Jupiter is dissolving into Uranus. Jupiter is completing an entire Jupiter cycle into Uranus and preparing for a new one. It's helpful to understand that when we look at these larger cycles, um, there's the period of time where they're moving towards a conjunction. I always want to remind everyone that it's not just about an aspect. It's not just a conjunction or a square or a trine. It's a process in time. Okay. So what's emerging right now is we're culminating something. Naturally, our attention is going within. There's something beginning to emerge and unravel, and we're being drawn towards that. There's a very strong quality in that phase of completing a cycle, of needing to accept and surrender to and allow things to be as they are, kind of letting go of control. And that's a very heightened quality. So we're all thinking about this Jupiter Uranus, it's approaching, but there's a lot of resolution and completion happening right now. And so there's a lot to say when we apply that to Jupiter. Do you have anything to say in just introducing the nature of this balsamic phase before we jump into the individual planets?
Yeah, I mean, it can ground it in something personal that's right here
Yeah.
because I think this is so beautiful that we happen to be having this conversation because, um, like I was saying before we started recording, you are a very Jupiterian figure in my own life, right? Like you said, you're the main person who I have studied astrology with for a bunch of years. And and now in my own life, this Jupiter is approaching. I'm coming up to my Jupiter return, right? So in my own chart, my own life, the Jupiter Uranus conjunction is going to be in my ninth house, very near my own Jupiter. So what's happening for me in my world of work as an astrologer is that I'm feeling that Uranus presence so strongly on, near my Jupiter. And so a lot of my own constructs of how I'm being asked to show up as a teacher, as a leader, all of those things are dissolving. And I'm being asked to let go of a lot of what I've not necessarily so much what I've been taught, but really open myself up to what's truly alive for me in this moment. And so even it's so beautiful and perfect that we're sitting here having this conversation because it's like for me it's like I'm sitting with you in a sense Jupiter, like a reflection of Jupiter for me, and I'm feeling how it's both present, it hasn't gone away, and yet there's a dissolving and a letting go so that I can then move into the truth, like the pure essence and truth of me as the divine, the intelligence of the divine that I'm meant to show up as in this next phase, right? Like as my Jupiter return finishes and moves on, all of it, right?
This is such a good Jupiter example because Jupiter corresponds in part to our understanding of reality, our interpretation of reality. And there's this process with Jupiter, and this is a big part of what's going on now, where we don't really render our previous realizations as incorrect. We just expand upon what we've come to realize.
Yeah.
And there's a very important quality of openness and humility and availability to continue learning with Jupiter. The challenge with the Jupiter archetype and transit would be becoming overly convinced of the framework and the philosophical ideas that we've established. So our existing realizations, they were real and spontaneous as they all are in the moment, but they're not all of it. And Jupiter is always going to be this next threshold of growth. So like that growth is what you're sharing, you know, where you're going as a teacher. Your Jupiter's in the ninth house, even like where you're going as a teacher, and your understanding of reality is sort of growing upon and building upon and expanding beyond the existing framework. And what it does, and it's kind of compassionate, it just reframes everything that we've known, and it says, and try looking at it again, the little bit of a wider angle, right? I often say that the expansion process that happens with Jupiter exists relative to Neptune, in the sense that Neptune is the truth with a capital T. There's no belief system or philosophy with Neptune. And we can say our existing understanding of reality, how we're interpreting it and forming a cosmological basis for it, that's Jupiter. Reality itself is love. It's sort of the undefined. You can't say it. It's you can't grab it. You can't possess it. It just is what it is, and you can write poetry about it. But as we grow in our understanding, we're always going to find that our philosophical framework is becoming more holistic, and I would say more loving fundamentally. And as we grow, we're able to encompass a more inclusive, closer to reality understanding, but we never quite get there with Jupiter. That's why that importance on really staying in the journey, really staying in that place where we're open to and available to realization, and being mindful of the tendency to arrive before we've gotten there. So that's one of the biggest Jupiter pieces. So can I delve a little more into that?
Totally, go for it.
Okay. Jump in whenever you feel. I'll go on a little bit of an Ari train here.
Then I'll jump in with a little Martha Uranus moment.
Do it. There we go. I'll be Jupiter for a moment.
Okay, go.
There's so much exuberance in Jupiter, and you know, I was talking to an individual recently, beautiful soul, kind, gentle, loving soul, and I asked them, like, what are your beliefs? And this individual spoke to me about their Christian beliefs, and it's pretty much a mainstream evangelical, more fundamentalist Christian view. And a lot of the beliefs that this person was expressing were pretty alienating, if I were to think of it that way, right? It's like, okay, well, in your framework, a lot of what I am or what is in existence can't really fit, right? But what I found to be interesting is, in this person's case, I didn't feel a lot of danger in their beliefs because their heart is so open, so loving, and so kind. And that's, to me, an example where our beliefs can simply be things that we've learned, things that we've come to know, and it's our framework for interpreting reality. The issue really becomes when we become defensive about our beliefs, and then we look at the world and we say, well, I can't accept that. That can't be true because I need to be right about it. In a sense, our beliefs are always going to be pushing up against the truth. And if we're not comfortable with the truth, with a capital T, right, then we're going to necessarily need to become sort of certain of ourselves and double down on our beliefs. But the truth is always going to be just whatever is, right? And our surrendering, our acceptance, our peace with truth is, say, our beliefs aren't so strong, they're not so important that they're getting in the way of that. So when our beliefs become the point of a personal and strong conviction, we have all kinds of issues that we see it all over the world, and we'll be able to interpret anything that happens in life through the filter of our existing belief systems. And what I find to be really interesting about beliefs, this is really the biggest thing here when it comes to this Jupiter Uranus. Beliefs literally tell you that you don't know. Like, to believe in something means you don't know it. And that's a Jeff Green teaching, which is something like, if you know something, there's no need to believe in it because you know it. To believe in something means you don't actually know. And to create a distinguishment, faith is a lot more like knowledge. Like, faith doesn't require any kind of belief. It doesn't require proof or justification. You sort of rest in the certainty of that which you are faithful in. You're at peace in it. That's like what faith is. You're not trying to prove anything. Belief is, sure, I believe in this. I believe in the existence of that. I believe this is the right way. And it's so interesting because it has no power. If you really think about the vibration of belief, there's very little power. It just says you think something is true, but you don't actually know. And so when we become certain and convinced of our belief systems, which can be a religion or a philosophy or the belief, I believe I'm being guided to go here and do this thing. I had a dream and I saw myself here, or I had a dream where you came to me and you said this, and I think this. We often don't want to admit, well, I don't actually know. I don't actually know if that's where I'm supposed to be, but I'm actually interpreting it as a thing that I'm supposed to be or a thing that I'm supposed to do. So when we look at this Jupiter in the balsamic phase to Uranus, one of the things that's happening right now is we're liberating our beliefs. And I'll close this piece with just two qualifiers. To liberate our beliefs, first and foremost, means becoming aware of their existence and actually getting honest about it. And that transition from living in the construct of the thing that we're telling ourselves to be true. And I just want to say how pervading it can be. I mean, just use the example of, someone in a mainstream religion and just, these are my beliefs, this is how it is, right? And we're going to interpret experiences according to the filter of our convictions. Or you have a meditation practice. It's not a matter of whether it's working for you or not, or a relationship, or it's right. It's a thing that you've told yourself is true about it, and why you're supposed to be doing it, and why it's good for you, and how it's supposed to work, and where it's supposed to take you. And that can completely overcloud and obscure just the honest self-admitting of how it's actually going. What is your actual experience? So there's a real deep movement right now in the collective and personally, as Jupiter moves to Uranus, to actually become aware of, what do I actually know? What's actually knowable within my own direct experience versus what am I trying to sustain and hold on to, but it's just a belief.
Yes. Yes. And I can actually give my belief system about Jupiter as an example. Because what's so, again, maybe perfect timing here. So in the astrology course that I'm holding this year, um, we're starting in March. We're focusing every month on a particular sign, and then whatever planets typically go with that sign, et cetera, right? So in March, we're starting with Pisces, and I'm going to be doing Jupiter and Neptune. Okay, which is, first of all, to include Jupiter in there is a different way of doing it than evolutionary astrology typically would. But the other thing is that what's so funny for me as I'm holding this course is that I would say, like I said to a group of the students yesterday, I think 50% of what I am teaching in this course is not what I was taught or what I learned.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I'm learning it as I'm going. Okay. And so as I'm preparing for the workshop next week, which is going to be on Pisces, Jupiter, and Neptune, and actually also the constellation of the water bearer. Anyway, um, I'm doing a lot of research on the actual planet of Jupiter,
Mm,
which is not something, that you taught me or that anybody really has taught me. But I'm learning. Oh my goodness. Okay. So for example, here's something I learned last night. Did you know? Maybe you know these things already. But okay, so Jupiter, the actual planet, apparently, according to NASA.gov, um, it is the first of the planets formed in our solar system because it is made up, is basically the way that it was formed was that our sun formed, and Jupiter is part of the gases from the sun that didn't congeal as the sun, but
mm,
congealed as its own entity.
mm,
And that's Jupiter.
mm.
So in a sense, it's like Jupiter is like a mini sun. And then it has 95 moons.
It's like its own solar system. It's got a lot of
Exactly.
moons. Yeah.
Right? So then it's
Yeah.
like, wow, okay. So I'm sitting here supposed to be the teacher of this, but it's the first time I've ever actually sat with, like the way you're describing Jupiter is how I've been taught because you're my teacher, right? And and then I'm over here supposed to be the teacher about Jupiter. So funny how it all is like coming together. And I need to sit with, okay, wait a second. So I'm not rejecting any of what you're saying, right? Just like the my previous Jupiter knowledge, Jupiterian knowledge about Jupiter still exists. It's still true. It still resonates when you're talking. I can feel it. There's like magic in it for me. And then I'm being asked though to open up,
Mm.
okay, wait a second. So there's an actual real planet there, and I'm learning all these things like about the science of it. So then what? Right? Do you see what I'm saying?
Well, I don't
uh,
know about the, I don't, I'm not sure, I'm not following then what, but I am following that there's some kind of expansion that happens for you in that. I mean, it's like you're, you're learning something you didn't know, and that's a Mercury, and that's a
mm,
Mercury piece. We get more information,
mm,
and that information can actually affect our larger understanding of things, right? It's like there's always a synthesis happening between Mercury and Jupiter. Right? So
mhm.
Jupiter is going to be giving it some sort of philosophical framework or meaning, but Mercury is the data, and they're interconnected. That's sort of the metaphysical understanding here that the physical components of the planets are inseparable from their metaphysical
Yeah,
energetics, right?
yeah.
Yeah, it just that's I think that's a part of the mutable cross in general. We're constantly uncovering new information, right? Think about the Gnostic Gospels. A lot of people will reject the Gnostic Gospels because, yeah, it's sure it's new information. Sure, we have historical, knowledge of it coming from a long time ago, and it's just as old as the other Gospels. But if this new knowledge is threatening to the framework that we already have, then I can't accept it. And I'm going to have to find some sort of belief structure to say, I can't include that. If there isn't a strong dogma around our existing belief structure, then new knowledge becomes interesting. Simple as that.
Hmm.
It just becomes, oh, cool. I
Hmm.
wonder what more I can learn from that.
Yeah.
What more can I glean from that?
Yeah. And the then what, when you said I'm not sure following you on the then what, for me, the then what is then um maybe where my Mercury and Pisces also is playing. I don't know where all of the above is playing together, but my then what is okay, great. So I have this my previous learning from Ari and other places, more of that what I'm coming to this with, but I'm being asked to open up to all this other stuff. So then when I sit with myself, when I sit with okay, what's truly authentically real for me in this moment, given all of what's here, um and I sit with okay, who is Jupiter as a being, like as a planet, as a ball, this massive ball of gas that is really almost, it was part of the sun, right? And it has 95 named new moons, so it has its own solar system, and it's so massive that its magnetic pull is protecting us on Earth from
Oh,
the
interesting.
asteroid belt, right? Like
Interesting.
it keeps the asteroid belt away from us, and we don't get imploded by them. Um, so then really what it feels like a lot of my teaching directive is actually to be in the not knowing, is to just sit and be. And what I'm being asked to do also in this way of teaching is actually just to sit and be with the knowing to arise through everybody in the course, right? That
Oh,
like
cool.
yeah, that the then what isn't necessarily supposed to come through me. Like maybe it'll come partly through me, and it'll come through you, and it'll come through all of us, right? It's a yeah.
Yeah.
Everything is being flipped on its head in a certain way.
Yeah. It leads me to want to make a distinction between, we can interpret anything and say, for example, 95 moons, okay, that corresponds to this, and that, right? And this is the point that I want to make. Our interpretations might look really good. They might seem really interesting and really inspiring, but they're still just interpretations. And I
Mhm.
really want to make a very important and powerful distinction between what we actually know through direct experience versus what's actually a belief or an interpretation of something. So interpreting something is thinking, oh, what could that mean? And then bringing forth some sort of understanding. No different than we have a dream and we make the decision on our own to interpret what it says we're supposed to do. The extent to which we bring forth interpretation without a direct relationship to actual embodied wisdom and understanding often escapes us. That's a big part of what I think is necessary on the spiritual path. We can then memorize a thing that we've decided is true, or read and that's, when we learn astrology, for example, we can read an association and say, hey, Jupiter corresponds to beliefs. And that's fundamentally different than having the direct realization of what that actually is. To actually go through a Jupiter transit and realize, oh, yeah, that's just a belief system, right?
Mhm.
To have the experience of a realization and to realize, oh, that's what a realization is like. It's spontaneous, it's freeing. And when I know it, I know it. And I don't even need to explain it. Oh, that's a Jupiter thing. Now I get that, right? I always want to say that if there's a truth to the planetary correlations, then when we experience some kind of direct insight, the truth of the correlations are also evident, right? Like we don't have to be seeking so far out to figure out, what does that mean? How does that work? How do we integrate that? How do we, there's so much information, so much knowledge, so many new data points. But what's most important is that and this is something I think you really value in your teaching. You focus, as I understand it, a lot on the embodied part, right? Which is great because they're out there and they're also in here. So wherever we're looking for a direct, authentic experience is where we're going to actually find an authentic and direct experience. Here's something I want to highlight, coming back to just this Jupiter, Uranus, and Taurus. One of the biggest struggles with Jupiter and Taurus is the movement towards continuity and security. So I know what I know. I'm familiar with it. I'm comfortable there. Maybe I've been teaching it this way for however many years, right? Or this is the practice that I've had for a long time. This is my belief system or my religion or my cosmology. This is the way that I think about my life that allows me to get my needs met. It's almost as if we're in this isolated well of our own mind, our own thinking, our own beliefs, and we're not aware of how much they're actually just a projection. And they keep us in that isolation. They keep us stable and familiar with the world that we know. And I think the biggest challenge with Jupiter moving towards Uranus is Uranus says reality is, the intelligence of life and the algorithm is unfolding inconsequential to our beliefs about it,
Mhm.
completely inconsequential. And that can feel incredibly unsettling and even frightening from the point of view of we're losing something. I'm losing my stability, my security. And we have to have an open mind. More than an open mind, we have to be willing to recognize there's a lot that I don't know. There's a perspective and a vantage point that is beyond where I've currently achieved, what I've currently been able to apprehend. And I have to be willing to let go of the continuity and stability of the known in order to expand in a much broader, more healthy, more helpful reality. This is the challenge with this Jupiter balsamic to Uranus. It will feel like a lot is changing. Like there's an impending change going on here. And April is going to be so powerful because we have that. We have the Chiron eclipse season. So we're this next month and a half, really, there's a sense of some deep essential movement is occurring. But wait, that can't happen, or I can't include that thought. Right? It's no different than, you know, come back to the religion idea, and then one of your children, their sexuality doesn't really fit into the box of your religious cosmology. It's like, well, that can't happen, but it's happening. But that's not what I'm supposed to be seeing. It's not supposed to be true. It's not supposed to be real, but it's happening, and here it is. Or I'm not supposed to want this. I'm not supposed to feel this. Or it's I want to keep it tight. See, the Taurus issue is I'm going to resist change for freaking as long as I possibly can. I'm going to resist it as long as I can, not because I love the way things are right now, but because I love being secure. I love the stability of knowing what's going on, where everything is, and being able to kind of have that sense of control over my life. I'd rather resist change and stay in the known than embrace the insecurity of everything falling apart. And from a Jupiter point of view, because that's what we'll focus on here, I think one of the teachings of this is don't arrive before you've gotten there. There's a lot more to learn and see. And it's like a little bit of a self reminder. Oh, I concluded too quickly. I made a conclusion too quickly, right? Like I had that dream and I believed the first thought I had about it. And for the past few months, I've just been believing that. I'm like, oh, wait, I didn't stop to think. Because here's an interesting thing when it comes to the dream symbols or anything that happens in our life, from a Uranian perspective, they're archetypal, right? They're reflecting forces that are awakening and liberating, and they're fundamentally impersonal, right? And we can interpret it, Jupiter, according to our existing understanding of reality, but we run the risk of, we might have a dream where, we see ourselves, driving a red car really quickly and we're having a lot of fun. We think, oh, I'm receiving the guidance to buy a car. But what does a fast red car symbolize? Right? And so we get too literal about these symbols, and we don't realize that we just had this one moment where we decided to believe a thought. Right? So that becomes shattering when there's so much of our life has sort of been rooted in these beliefs that we have that we didn't even realize are just beliefs. So a big theme right now is actually sort of the loosening up of those.
Yeah, I get the image of with Uranus in general, but I think especially Uranus in Taurus, and especially with the Jupiter heading toward it, is I see Uranus as like it's like the lightning bolt that it plugs straight into the light grid of existence, if that makes sense, right? And it helps us to connect straight into what the truth of the moment happens to be energetically.
Mm.
And so for me, it actually feels really exciting. But I mean, I'm feeling what you're saying too, and how yes, it does take a moment of trusting to let go, to be really present with, oh wow, no, this is actually can be very exciting that we can just click into that electric truth of what's actually the form that's actually the truth of the divine in this moment. Does that fit or not fit with what you're
Sure,
saying?
sure, absolutely. Yeah, be prior to giving it an interpretation. One thing, a useful framework that Jeff Green taught is Uranus is sort of like the signals from the higher mind, right? They're happening outside of time.
Yeah.
Um, and they're translating and they're filtering them through the local mind. So we're going to Mercury identify, okay, that was a red car, right? Symbols, content, particular perceptions, right? And we'll have a memory of that was a thing that happened in time. And then the Jupiter function's going to interpret it. Right? That's a tree. This is what trees symbolize. This is the meaning that I'm giving it. But from a purely Uranian point of view, the nature of reality itself reflects the vibrational intelligence of creator. It's like the mind of God. And we're looking at reality as a fractal that exists on every size scale, archetypes manifesting and popping in and out of time thousands of years ago, showing up right now. Like what's actually unfolding right now is not about a linear Newtonian physics time scale that we're just so conditioned to believe in. It's a lot deeper than like the algorithm itself and the way time and space is actually operating from the perspective of being beyond time is far more intelligent than what we tend to understand. Just the nature of incarnation itself and how the natal chart reflects both the ongoing intention for soul evolution, but also where we're coming from and how all the people and places and things that pop up in our life are just these sort of like underneath the surface continuations from earlier chapters along the journey. So the meaning that we give it is going to become incredibly conditioned and incredibly limited by our existing capacity to understand and interpret our own experiences. Now, this leads me to say that it's not about not interpreting, because we're always interpreting, we're always integrating experience to make meaning out of it. But those like pure electrical impulses that are just sort of arising, that are speaking to archetypal energetics that are just here, in order to work with them, we have to be able to synthesize them and contemplate their meaning in our own life. The key is to recognize that we're always going to be limited in our capacity to grasp the full scope of what it is. And so we don't want to get too stuck. The second we become defensive and that we need to prove our rightness is almost an immediate sign that we've gotten ourselves too stuck. Everything can be interpreted. Everything is pointing to, it's like you have a tarot card, right? This is a great example. A tarot card doesn't tell you what it means. It contains all kinds of symbols in it. If you're pulling it and you're asking a question, that symbology is going to be relevant to whatever the question is that you asked. It's going to require your own Jupiter interpretive capacities to be able to make meaning out of it and apply it in your own life. But prior to our interpreting of it, it's so purely energetic that its intelligence is relevant and speaks perfectly to where you're at and to what's unfolding, always just beyond the threshold of what you can actually fully internalize at that moment in time. So we want to be able to internalize something in a way that actually supports us to live more fully here and now and to access the rich terrain of our own soul growth. The second we're trying to make something true is the second the journey stops. It's a really important thing to be thinking about right now. You know, we can have, just to expand upon the idea of dream symbols or tarot cards or oracle readings or an astrology transit, right? Like these things can express in so many ways. They can show up in so many ways. Like a single astrological transit can mean many things and take many nuances throughout many different curves and turns. It's never just one thing, right? No astrologer should ever say, oh, Pluto is squaring Pluto, this means that, right? It's evolution, but how it unfolds, it's incredibly nuanced. So to be able to make meaning out of our own experiences means there needs to be a gauge for knowing whether our interpretation is helpful or not, or whether our interpretation is just obscuring the possibility of more learning. And that to me is where, does it create more space in our soul? Does it bring us more into the present moment? Does it bring with it a sense of freedom and expansion and openness to the unknown, because that's always going to be a sign that we're not clouding our mind with a belief. If we feel open and available to whatever happens next, it means we're not holding on too strongly to a conviction. If we're already certain about how things are supposed to go, we already know this is how it's supposed to go and this is where it's supposed to lead. We've actually built a little sand castle. Or let's stick with Taurus. We dug a hole in the earth, we put ourselves in that hole, and we said, this is where I'm supposed to stay. And then we look at the sky from the point of view of that hole, using the frog in the well, the Jeff Green analogy, and we say, that's the sky. That's the whole world that I know. And we're going to find ourselves incredibly limited, and we may not even realize it.
Yeah.
Until Uranus comes along and everything changes, and it's like, oh, huh, maybe I was in a hole the whole time, but I convinced myself that I wasn't.
Yep. Absolutely.
And that's what we're preparing for right now. Like, this is what's emerging. And just to say, right now, in the time of this video, we have, Mars moving to square Uranus. At this time, it's almost like we're getting a very strong snapshot. So it's helpful to pay attention to the synchronicities, the signals, the repeated patterns that are coming from outside of time. Like our individual destiny, where our soul is going, kind of what's in the blueprint. It's sort of like popping itself up. It can feel like a glitch in the matrix, but it's really just the program. And we have to be very willing to just pay attention and say, that right there doesn't really fit the beliefs that I've already made about my life and where it's all going. And well, I'll share one more thing about that in a moment, but I want to hear what you have to say.
Well, it's arising for me two questions for you. One is, and a reflection that goes with the first question. One is when I'm hearing you talk, what's coming to my mind is a question that I think everybody probably naturally asks when you're getting an astrology reading. Well, what does that mean? Right?
Yeah.
Like, so I'll say, oh, I'm noticing that Jupiter is coming to your Venus or whatever. And then, of course, the person says, well, what does that mean? And then I say, well, I don't know. It could mean all kinds of things. Right. But then, so I'm curious. My question to you is, I know you have that happen because I'm sure I've said that to you myself. But there is something that comes for me in my body. This is how I work. So I'm curious how you work. But I will get like an electric impulse, like boom. This is what's really alive for me in this moment that feels true to enough to say, but then I always give the caveat, but I really don't know. It could mean infinite things. Here's what's, alive in the moment. I will say it with the caveat that you, as the person whose chart I'm reading, your being knows really, ultimately.
It does. It does.
Yeah.
Our inner being does know.
Mm-hmm.
We are plugged into the program of where we're going. It's not a mystery to our soul, but we have all of our conditioning and our beliefs. And so we're not consciously thoughtful of this program. We're not attuned to it. We might have a lot of resistance to it. So the intelligence of these transits are aligned and in harmony with our soul. So, a transit, like, let's stick with this transit, right? Wherever this Jupiter Uranus is happening in your natal chart, this is where there's the opportunity for a great expansion, but also a letting go of a lot of what we've already kind of structured in our own minds. What would that look like? Right? Is that going to be like exciting, spontaneous realizations, or will it feel like a lot of loss? The answer to that is more of an intimate meeting of our actual personal experience. Like, the meaning is universal. What it means, like what the teaching of it is universal, but its expression and how it's going to interact and manifest in our own life is as diverse as there are individual people, and even more than that. So if I'm with someone in a session and that arises, it's getting quiet. Mm-hmm. It's actually connecting with the field of the soul itself. The soul's journey and what they're here to experience, what their evolutionary program actually is. And it's not about my interpretation of it as much as just first connecting with the truth of it. you
Yeah.
know, like connecting with the truth of it. I think what comes next is our ability to poetically interpret and give expression to it and articulate it. But we always want to stay open enough that our words don't get louder than the numinous meaning of what it actually is.
Yeah.
And this is again, you come back to the idea of a dream. It's no different. We might have feelings that arise or sort of intuitions about it, but we want to stay open to actually allow the full scope of whatever signals are coming through to actually just be what they are and to connect with the field of our own. This is why, in working with dreams, it's actually, in my opinion, often more helpful to just detach ourselves from any personal meaning that we might have with any of the symbology and just take note of everything that we saw, everything that we experienced, and to just allow the archetypal nature of that to impress upon our own soul. Like what's actually objectively impersonal to my own story, my own understanding, what's actually happening. Jupiter's transiting on my Venus. What's actually happening in my own inner reality? Yeah, it's just strong, bringing people back to themselves and trying to stay clear of a belief system and actually staying within the realm of direct experience. It's important that the words that we're speaking to someone are relevant to what they're actually experiencing and not abstract and conceptual. And it's like, oh, okay, I guess this means I'm going to make a lot of money or something. Like none of that's really ever helpful.
And I feel like this is true for people who are astrologers, who are therapists, who are anything, but also even just in the way we approach life is I really do feel like the coming back to the not knowing is key to being able to honor what's actually here,
Yeah.
right? And I think it can get so easy for someone in a position who's, trying to do an astrology reading or whatever it is, but in all kinds of areas, if you're a healer, if you're a whatever it is, it's so easy to feel like we're supposed to have an answer. And then the supposed to have an answer can take on a life of its own and create
Right.
its own reality that has nothing to do with reality at
Yeah,
all.
well said. Yeah.
Yeah. Um,
Yeah, the answer is a thing, like we're making up the answer. Um the stars never said, here's a Jupiter transit, and if you double click on the star, it'll say what it means. That doesn't exist anywhere. In
oh
this
my God.
particular moment and day and age, we have our framework of interpretation, which is very particular, and even evolutionary astrology at this particular moment in time. It's a particular framework. Astrology was never really thought of in this way, at least for a long time. And I'm sure the way that we organize and interpret and give meaning to these things will continue to change and evolve and grow as we continue to apprehend and expand into a greater understanding of reality and who we are and our place within it. You mentioned the Jupiter thing. We often fail to recognize how much our thoughts are just images that we're projecting. So we think of Jupiter, we have like an image of what Jupiter is. Then you get this new information like, oh, I've never projected an image of Jupiter with 95 moons around it before, right? I heard in your last talk that there's this perspective that Chiron's growing rings. Like I've never thought of rings around Chiron, right?
Yeah.
Um, once we start to expand our vision of the actual astronomy of the world, like of the universe, that continues to invite a more expanded interpretation. I mean, many of you might know I'm a big proponent of the binary star theory,
Yeah.
that our solar system is a part of a binary star system. I interviewed Walter Cruttendam, who's done amazing work on this research. And there's a star that I think is a very likely candidate to be a part of our binary star system.
You think
The
of
per
Sirius?
No,
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 different
no,
one.
not that one. Yeah, different one.
Hmm.
And the prevailing scientific world is, and of course I don't know, but the evidence is enough that I'm like really curious about it, right?
Mm-hmm.
The prevailing scientific world has a really hard time accepting the framework or the theory of a binary star system, not because the existing lunisolar theory works, where like the sun and moon gravitational pull is creating a wobble, which is what makes the Earth wobble over 26,000 year. Like the Earth wobbles thing is outdated. There are many problems with that theory, and I won't go into that now. Check that video with Walter if you want to. But the scientific community still holds on to that, not because it actually makes sense, but because it's known, it's familiar. If I can believe it, it sounds enough, and I can use it to explain all kinds of things. But what about this problem with that theory? Like, what about these logical holes to that theory? There's a lot of resistance amongst human beings in general to actually just accepting, that can't be true. It's not working. So here's this thing that I want to say. We have a difficulty accepting that something may not be true because we don't understand that if it's not true, that there is something outside of that that works even better. We project, if this isn't true, then something is fundamentally wrong, right? Like it's basically I'll lose everything. Let's go beyond the scientific idea just to our personal lives. Like if this life path or this relationship path or if this way of earning money, decisions that I've been making, if that's not actually working for me, if that's not actually relevant or resonant to my soul path, then letting it go is scary. But we're not letting it go. We're just thinking of it differently. And that's the point. There's no real letting go of anything here other than the interpretation. Like, we don't really let go of a relationship. We just think of it differently. We're trying to say this is how things are. We're not really letting go of money or working or creativity, or we're just thinking about all the things that we've been doing differently. So we're giving value and meaning. We're placing value and meaning in a better way. Maybe we've given a lot of value and meaning to things that are somewhat displaced. And so it's just simply thinking about it differently and then allowing for a new and more expanded and helpful interpretation. But there can be a very overwhelming sense of, if this isn't true, I'm going to be fundamentally insecure. I'm going to lose something. We become very identified with our cosmological views, so identified with them. I already wrote an article on the lunisolar theory. It doesn't matter if it's not. I published the article. So I just want to make it true, tidy, I already invested this much money in this program or in this course, or in this relationship. And I've gone so far. I'm driving down the road and I'm eating my bag of chips and listening to my music. And I don't care if I'm going 30 miles in the wrong direction. I'm enjoying myself and it's working for me. I don't care if I'm not going to actually get to where I'm trying to go. I'm comfortable. Like, I don't want to have to accept that I'm going in a different direction than where I want to go. It doesn't render all of this as bad or wrong. It just says, think of it differently, right? You don't have to stop going in the direction you're going, but consider that if you're trying to get to point A, point B is in the opposite direction. Maybe stop for a while. You can hang out there for a while, but we're going to have to be willing to think of it differently if we actually want to live a fulfilling and meaningful life. I think one of the biggest points of insecurity with this transit that we're just sort of meeting right now is where there's that anxiety of impeding change and the projection of insecurity. It isn't necessarily so, but we have to be willing to actually think of our lives very differently right now.
My 17-year-old, and the other day, so they have Jupiter in Sagittarius squaring their nodes. Okay, so Jupiter plays a very big role, I think, for them in their life. But anyway, so they are, I would say, agnostic. I question that. But anyway, and I'm clearly not. And so we have a lot of conversations about our belief systems. And, there's a lot of them being kind of like, they like you, right? Like, they like you as a person, and they like Chris Skidmore, who's also an astrologer. There's like a couple people they're willing to entertain that. Yeah, I like these people, but astrology, no. Like a lot of my spiritual belief system, my 17-year-old not into. So the other day, 2 or 3 weeks ago, they sent me an article and like texted me an article from school and just wrote, I think this has a lot to do with what goes on between you and me. And and the article was, of course, a scientific article about the fact that when a person's belief systems are challenged, it actually activates the same part of the brain that is the fight or flight
Mm,
process.
wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah. I mean, it's really interesting, right? Because I do get pretty upset, not toward my 17-year-old out loud, but in my body, I can feel it. Like when, they're really challenging the fact that I believe in a spiritual higher power or whatever it is, I get really riled up. Like I don't enjoy it. It's not a, I don't, it doesn't feel good in my body. And I don't really want to engage in the conversation either. It feels sort of
Uh,
pointless, right? But this is my child, so I do engage because I don't want to just dismiss them because I care about them. But anyway, so it's just fascinating.
I love that. See, I have a very opposite experience. Um, I love talking to people. Maybe this is true for you too, but I love talking to people that think nothing like me
Hmm.
because it's going to point out where I might have a belief system. And I actually want to find a way of being authentic to my knowing without any beliefs getting in the way. And if I'm authentic to my knowing, I should be able to relate to anyone,
Hmm. Hmm.
regardless of their outlook, regardless of their belief systems, right? There's the knowing and our inherent understanding, and that will shine through our being. It's not going to be a thing that we're needing to explain or prove. And there's going to be no defense. I have two friends that are atheists, and they're so loving, and I love talking to them. I would never do this with anyone, where I just say, I want to look at your chart because I wait for a person to come to me to say, I want to do a reading with you, right? I know they'll probably never like reach out to me to look at their, charts. But because they have zero interest or investment in any of this being real, but they're so wonderful to talk, such great listeners and such curious beings and kind. There's a natural excitement for me to just like look at their chart and have the joyful experience of seeing where that goes. And I haven't done that yet, and I don't know if that's aligned, but just the experience of talking to people who have completely different cosmologies and perspectives, you can tell, regardless, like that lady I spoke about, this Christian person that I spoke about, such a strong belief system, but when it came to relationship, I didn't get her beliefs, right? All I got was just the loveliness of her being, her kindness. And I'm like, this is the kind of person where even if they were confronted with something that doesn't fit into their beliefs, they would still be a loving and kind person. That's my sense of it, right? Um, and I think this is a part of Jupiter Uranus. What we know doesn't really get explained easily. It's actually really hard to, like, if someone asks me like, what's your view on God and astrology? I'm like, like if I'm teaching a class, right? And I'm like, there's a topic and I'm like focusing my mind toward, I'm a teacher now. And I'm like, but like beyond that, I have the hardest time actually talking about these things. But if like someone who has a different belief system asked me, talk to me about, you know, your beliefs in astrology, I would have a lot of fun getting quiet and just like, ooh, how can I look at this and feel authentic and speak words that aren't like the words that other people who are also into spirituality and, mysticism would relate to. You know what I'm saying? Like really coming from an authentic place where I feel like I'm listening to it at the same time. I just love that personally, you know?
Yeah, no, and then just to clarify, I absolutely love, of course. I mean, I grew up all over the world, right? Like I love learning about lots of different kinds of people and hearing them. That's not the issue for
Yeah.
me. I love that. Um, for me, it's more that if I feel like I need to defend my own belief system, that's where I feel, I think what my 17-year-old was pointing out.
Yeah, yeah. Well, here's something, it's interesting, like where we have a belief system to defend, is where we're playing that silly game of being right. It's
Hmm.
the same thing, right? I'm defending a belief system, which means I'm needing to prove something to you, which means like what? Why? What's the point?
Right.
What's the point? I rather just be wrong, or not be understood than prove or defend something. It's a
Yeah.
lot more interesting for me personally to have the experience of just letting things be. And you know, obviously I have a lot of Sag. I've had a lifetime to kind of work with this piece. When I was a child, um, I would just love striking up conversations with people. In fact, I'm a Jupiter Uranus person myself.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, you know,
Hmm.
Jupiter, it's a new phase though, but it's there. In my chart, I would just love talking to people about my worldview. For a while, it was, you know, Judaism and the Talmud and how it's organized and how it works and why I live the way that I live right now and why I follow halakha and Jewish law and all that kind of stuff. And I've tasted enough of that in myself to realize I can take that pattern with me, into any phase of my life, even if it's like an open-minded spiritual phase of my life. And it's actually not who I want to be. Like, I
Hmm.
don't want to have some sort of tidy, well-designed philosophical framework that I use to explain everything. I mean, I love talking about A Course in Miracles too, when I have the opportunity, because it's such a powerful teaching for me, and I feel so humbled by it. But I feel such a difference between like explaining my beliefs about it versus getting to look at it and get curious about something that I'm really discovering. Just like the energetic difference between telling someone that we already decided we know versus looking into the truth of what I'm learning and connecting with right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally agree. Totally.
Yeah.
Yes. Absolutely. Can I ask you one last question?
Yeah.
Um, also is a rising. I'm curious to get your perspective on this. So we have Jupiter moving toward Uranus, of course, and Uranus now is ruling Pluto.
Yeah.
And we just had Pluto move for the second time into Aquarius and all of that, right? So I'm just curious, anything in particular arise for you about that bigger context of the Pluto and Aquarius deal that we're in?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there are two things to say. It absolutely emphasizes right now collectively the Uranian energy. So Uranus, as the ruler of Pluto, says that engaging with the evolutionary necessity of Pluto and Aquarius, which is about a fundamental transmutation beyond the precedent of what we've known. So it is by itself about, evolving into more of our individual nature, evolving more into our soul vibration. And there's like an acceleration process that's happening in that. Wherever Uranus is going to speak to how that acceleration is happening. So I think the thing to really be thoughtful of, being in Taurus, is the resistance to change. So that Aquarian Taurus dimension is, I don't want to budge.
Mm.
I'm afraid I don't want to be destabilized. I don't want to be an outsider. I don't want to be different. I don't want to destabilize the status quo of my life. I want everything to stay the same. So the other thing that I think about is, so this Uranus and Taurus, it's moving towards Gemini, right?
Yeah.
Over the next couple years, and pretty soon it's going to be within the orb of a first quarter trine with Pluto. So we are coming to a point where this acceleration of change and growth is going to be emphasized with the creative self-knowledge of that trine, which says, okay, there's been a lot of healing, growth, and challenges. That trine says, now you know what to do, right? It says we're kind of building to a place where there's a particular station, aspects are stations along a cycle, right? Where there's a particular way of relating to your experiences that is calling upon greater self-confidence and self-trust to integrate and apply all the things that you've been learning. I think we're approaching a very radical time period. I would actually say, more broadly, you know, as we're moving into that trine, we have for the next few years, Chiron right now with the North Node, as it moves to a square to the nodes. This is a little bit out there, so just follow me, everyone, for a moment.
Mhm.
We have in around 2027, Chiron will enter. Taurus. The nodes will be in Leo, Aquarius.
Mm.
And by that time, Pluto will have also joined the nodes. And right now, essentially, Pluto is the only planet, outside of joining the nodes. So if you look at the chart, maybe I can pull up a chart and just exemplify that. I think there's a larger cycle culminating with this Pluto and with this Chiron, with that square to the nodes and to Pluto over the next few years as we approach that.
Wow. Incredible.
It's worth its own
Yeah.
topic.
Like it's like that's a whole
Maybe I can pull it up actually just
yeah.
briefly
Yeah.
and demonstrate that. Let's do that. I'm going to share the screen right now just to show everyone what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Um, okay, so just taking note, like here we have the North Node. Um, and the first thing that'll actually happen is Neptune and Saturn will join the North Node. That's actually the first thing that happens, right? And then once that happens, let's move it forward a little bit.
And that's going to happen in the end of Pisces. Wait, no, Saturn will probably meet it in the beginning of Aries. Wait,
Yeah,
no.
early Aries, end of Pisces, both.
Uh-huh. Both, yeah.
Move it forward a little bit. Here we have Saturn, Pisces, Neptune, right? All there at the end of Pisces, okay?
Mhm.
Once they pass, the only big player is Pluto,
Mhm.
okay? So Pluto is going to be moving to join the nodes over the next couple years. So by the time we get to 2027, here, right now we're in early 2028, okay? We have Pluto on the North Node and Chiron squaring the nodes. So 2028. This is finally, look, there's nothing else there, right? All the big planets have already passed the North Node. In fact, now we have a new cycle with Jupiter that began the South Node, but that's a different, topic. So there's a lot of culmination. Just think about all these larger planets, Saturn, Neptune, Pluto, Chiron, all passing the North Node between 2024 and 2028. These are really powerful pushes to these evolutionary cycles of growth, facing some of the deeper, more existential facets of our soul journey. And it's all really held and grounded in the greater context of Pluto and Aquarius, right? And it truly does complete with Chiron entering into the first quarter square with that North Node, just as it joins with Pluto on the North Node. Just a really powerful, and then Saturn will be in Aries, far beyond Neptune. There's so many essential developments happening in the next 4 years, we can say, culminating with a profoundly new cycle in 2020. I'm just realizing as I'm speaking, okay, 2028 will be the next election year here in the US. And that's always an exciting and very instigating time as well. Right. But
Wow.
that's also, notice how at that point, for several years, Uranus will be in that trine with Pluto as well. And that's very activating, incredibly activating.
So that brings me, I think, to a last question, at least on my end, um, which is so for me, also the bigger context of life in this moment, right? And this may or may not fit with your view, but I think it at least overlaps a little bit. You tell me, is on in the biggest picture, where I'm situated, where I'm being called on a soul level is to be sitting in presence on the planet as a being who is being asked to be here to help in the awakening of beings, right? So that's a big part of what shows up in my work. That's a big part of what shows up. People who are drawn to me are, going through these quote unquote awakening processes in various ways. So when I look at the astrology, it's really I mean, I'm certainly interested in astrology, but it's in service of this bigger picture of whatever this moment in time happens to be.
Yeah.
And for me, it's largely that awakening thing. So, and we're, a lot of people talking about we're moving into the age of Aquarius and whatever that means, and different feelings about what the timing of that is. And anyway, so I'm just curious, in your perspective, if you'd step back even from the astrology, what is alive for you in this moment and where we are in time, and what's the bigger picture of your soul calling, or what's going on
Hmm.
with all of that?
What comes to me is there's a poetic, artful, graceful path of the beauty way. Um, a life that is an expression of harmony and beauty and art in our being, in our work, in our relationships. And it resonates with, for me, the deepest yearnings and expressions of my own devotion and what brings me the most life. And the gap between where I am and that, the gap between where we are and this greater, more embodied expression of beauty,
Mm.
is the deconstruction of the overly formed and crystallized patterns and habits that we are accustomed to, so that we can experience something even more beautiful. If here's the analogy that comes to mind, you're given a bunch of building supplies and you build to the best that you can a beautiful piece of furniture, and it works, and you're like, wow, I can't believe I did that. It's so great. I built this on my own. I can sit on it. I like the way it looks. And then a carpenter comes along and says, hey, I can redo this with you and make it even better. And at first there's that resistance. It's like, oh, but I'm so comfortable and familiar with this. All the while, maybe it's not the most sound structure because you built it and you don't really know how to build things well, but it works. And you have this opportunity for something that it's not excessive. I want to make a difference here. It's not excessiveness, it's just improved, more functional, healthier, more structurally aligned, more beautiful. I can design some flower carvings into it. I can sand the wood for you. I can take out that piece of board and actually cut it to a more proper dimension and fit it back into it places, and you can sit better and more comfortably. Like everything can land in a way of greater grace and beauty. I mean, this particular example is real. When I was building up my van several years ago, I built my own closet in the van, and I was really proud of myself. I used like the extra tiles that I used to build my bamboo floor to build a closet, and I was just like, yeah, I did it. And then I was actually working with my carpenter friend, and he advised me to take it down and do it over again. And what we created out of cedar was so much more beautiful and functional and relevant to what I was wanting to create, right? So it's not about like needing more or better from the point of view of I'm not content with how things are. We can be very content with simple, right? But to allow the conditions of our life to feel even more relevant to the grace and the beauty and the vibration of our own soul. That's what I think is unfolding. For me, there's always that question around music and, when I'll just plunge. I have like 4 albums in me that I haven't made yet. And it's one of those things.
Mm. Yeah,
Yeah.
wonderful.
Well, thank you everyone for watching. And once again, if you're new to Martha, she has some really beautiful interviews and content out there. Recently, you had that Chiron interview with Melanie Reinhardt, one of the forerunners of the Chiron research many years ago. Beautiful teacher. And yeah, thank you all for watching.